Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is Seth Farber. This is his second time on the show, and last time he was fortunate enough to have Diane with him, and this time we don't because of me, to be honest with you. I told him yesterday that I was going to call her, but I misunderstood and thought we understood that I was going to call her at show time, not call her and confirm in advance. So she wasn't there when we called because I didn't call her and confirm it because I misunderstood. So we do still have, Seth with us, and hopefully we'll have some callers and we'll get some more questions in the chat room like we did last time. But we're going to be finishing up where the time we didn't have last time. We run out of time when we're talking about his book, The Spiritual Gift of Madness, The Failure of Psychiatry and the Rise of the Mad Pride Movement, which when I was putting this out and posting it to different networks I'm in, I just basically put on there madness or mystic, you decide, because in the end, that's pretty much what this book is asking that question or is making that statement. Would you agree with that, Seth?
Yeah.
So, anyway, I thought that was kind of an eye-catcher, so I thought I'd put that on there.
Yeah.
But, Seth, I want to thank you for returning.
I should say to your audience that I am a psychologist. I don't think you mentioned that. I'm a doctor of psychology.
I am so glad that you mentioned it because I was dropping the ball on that one.
Yeah.
Yes, you are a doctor of psychology. And while you're on that topic, could you help us clarify or help me clarify what the difference is between a psychologist and a psychiatrist?
Well, a psychiatrist goes to medical school, and a psychologist doesn't. It's a PhD program, like any other PhD program. After you finish college, you do a master's and then a PhD. So it's a 3 to 5 year program. And supposedly to learn the intricacies of the human mind, but I think it's really dubious whether I could cite other studies showing that it's not that effective, but nevertheless, I am still I like to consider it a doctor. And actually, the question could be raised about psychiatry as well, because they're genuine doctors of medicine, but psychiatry is a form of bogus medicine.
Yeah, I've read that psychiatry is I don't know about its beginning, but at least its ending has turned it into something of a pseudoscience.
Well, it began as a kind of keepers. They began making their money in the late 17th century by running the asylums, in which they put everyone from poor people to people that their families did not like. It wasn't that difficult to get someone committed to a mental asylum, as they were called in the 19th century. So there was a big battle in the 19th century. Some of these institutions are custodial warehouses for many of them were crazy people, quote unquote, people who couldn't adjust to the conditions of life as unpleasant as they may have been. Anyway, these places, just like 20th century, they were often tortured in these places. Very few people got better, but that was because of the treatment. There are a few better places called moral reform, in which they actually treated people like human beings. And those tended not to be run by psychiatrists, but to be run by priests or clergy people or just lay doctors. But there was a battle for who would get the government contracts for control of the psychiatric asylums, and the psychiatrists pretty much won it by the end of the battle by the end of the 19th century. So by the 20th century, as Peter Bregan had pointed out, the major change when they were locking people up, that was the decade in which they began the assault on the brain.
Right.
First, there was insulin shock, insulin coma therapy, which caused convulsions and people to go into a coma. Then, of course, there was electroshock, and now there's been the class of many different kinds of the psychotropic drugs that are used, all of which Peter Bregan, who's the psychiatrist most well known for his critique of psychiatry, is referred to as brain-damaging and brain-disabling drugs. And that's a contention that Robert Whitaker, the journalist, has corroborated in his book, Anatomy of an Epidemic. The subtitle there.
Yeah, I've been to his website.
Oh, yeah.
Some of these people you mentioned in your book, I was hoping to get on my show later.
Yeah. Anyway, Bob shows that how do you explain the enormous increase? Let me see where I have this book here. The enormous increase in the number of people on psychiatric drugs, enormous increase in the number of people that are labeled mentally ill. Now, if psychiatry was as successful as they often claim to be, you would expect to see a reduction.
Right, exactly.
So what he showed is that, going over all the statistics, is that actually the treatments make people iller. I mean, for example, I was looking, can't find it right now. Oh, here it is. Actually, I should be plugging my own book, but I discuss it, Bob's findings in my book too, but it's called Magic Bullet, Psychiatric Drugs and the Astonishing Rise of Mental Illness in America. And he cites a number of studies which shows that the drugs cause a chronicity in people. For the most part, I mean, I don't run into people occasionally who say that the drugs have helped them like nothing else could. But I must say that most people are on those, and this is what the statistics show too. The Harrow experiment is particularly dramatic in terms of so-called bipolars and schizophrenics. And we have lots of other studies on bipolars and schizophrenics. So, now, before I say this, I don't want anyone listening to this to go away and throw their drugs down the drain. Not because I don't flush them down the toilet or anything. Not because I don't want people off the drugs, but because there's immediately what happens when people go off the drugs abruptly is that they have withdrawal effects. Psychiatrists say filled with the psychiatry is told all kinds of lies about about the drugs. I mean, one of the common lies is that they correct an imbalance. Well, there's no evidence of a quote unquote imbalance in the first place. So
right.
That's right. So
no, I mean I've studied that, and I happen to know you're correct in that. And the truth of the matter is, it's really listed in your book that these hunger strikers went on strike, and they got a reaction from the APA, and the APA did anything in their reaction, their response, except provide the proof of this chemical imbalance. And there was another group that you said, another panel, that responded back for the hunger strikers that told them how they were not answering adequately and how this went back and forth. But in the end, the APA never proved that there was such an imbalance, in other words.
That's right, exactly, yeah. It's quite a dramatic thing that David Oakes of Mind Freedom International, who was himself quote-unquote labeled schizophrenic when he was at Harvard, a student at Harvard, and was hospitalized 5 times. He was determined to expose the lies of the psychiatric establishment, and the hunger strike turned out to be a pretty successful way to do it, considering it's hard to get publicity. They did get publicity, and
got some good parties involved as well.
Yeah, and as you said, the people on the committee that were backing them up were there were a few PhDs and a lot of MDs, like Peter Bregan, Fred Bauman, who's a neurologist, mostly PhDs. It's hard to find, Lauren Mosher was still alive. That's another story in itself.
If you'll pardon me for a minute for interrupting you on that one, Seth, I want to call your attention back to a name you mentioned, Peter Bregan. This is a key name, in my opinion, if you want me to be honest, because of the fact I've looked the man up, I've done some study into him, and the man is been practicing 44 years. He graduated Harvard. He actually goes to court to help get people off of medication that are being forced to take it against their will. He's also got a lifetime membership in the APA, even though he's going against the APA. I mean, he's known as the voice of consciousness of the psychiatric profession. He is a psychiatrist. He is a member of the APA, but he sees the problem, and he's trying to stand up and make transformation. I find him to be a key person because of all his credentials. I mean, the man's pretty much impeccable. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, he was one of the people that you mentioned that were standing up backing David Oakes' hunger strike group. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There were about 10 people. And one of the other people was David Cohen, who's a PhD, but Dr. Cohen, he co-authored a book with Peter Bregan on how to get off of psychiatric drugs. The thing was, I have this in front of me now. At the end of this whole thing, this debate back and forth, the APA finally issued a statement on the doc. First, when they went on the hunger strike, David and I guess there were about 10 other people asked the APA for proof that in fact emotional suffering was caused by a lesion in the brain, and that it was caused by a biochemical imbalance. Which anyway, there were a number of questions they asked them, and their first answer was rather evasive. But they said, "Well, just go look it up in such and such a book and such a book." Well, they went back and they looked it up in these books, and the books said, the two were one was a standard psychiatric textbook, but it's repeatedly said there was no proof that there was a brain disorder. And then the other was a report by the Attorney General, which also said there was no proof. Finally, at the end, 5 or 6 months later, the APA itself admitted, quote this, research has shown that serious neurobiological disorders such as schizophrenia, however, exist. Schizophrenia, bipolar, and others have a strong genetic component. They claim that doesn't mean anything really, but that's not the issue. The issue is whether it's a disease and whether it's caused by lesions or disorder in the brain. And they admit here, brain science has not advanced to the point where scientists or clinicians can point to readily discernible pathological lesions or genetic abnormalities that in themselves serve as reliable or predictor biomarkers of a given mental disorder or mental disorders as a group. Ultimately, no gross anatomical lesions may ever be found. Anyway, at the end of this whole thing, they basically say, well, the check is in the mail, and
we're looking, we just can't find it, basically. But we know it's you know what it reminds me of, Seth? Bush's weapons of mass destruction, don't you think?
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
There is something I'd like to take a minute out and do real quick, like, if you don't mind me cutting in here. And that is, I want to remind everybody that your website is www.sethfarber.com. And you can get more information about him and all of his books there, his articles, anything that he's got out there, he's pretty much put on his website. Also, you can get his book at any Barnes, Noble, Amazon, what have you, book carrier. I don't know about some of the smaller chains, maybe not, but the big ones for sure. Also, you can scroll down below the chat room, below the call-in number, and if you look at the bottom of his show description, you'll see a book cover linked to Amazon. If you purchase it through that link, I get a commission, if you'll pardon my shameless plug. But yeah, that would be nice. Also, the call-in number for those of you that want to call in and ask questions is 832-632-7904. And I don't always answer the phone right away because I try not to interrupt my guests. If y'all are listening elsewhere, would like to join the chat room, the address is www.paranormalpalace.com. I'm sorry, Seth, I was waiting till a few people started showing up in the chat room to kind of get that one out to make sure somebody heard me say it.
Yeah. The book is called The Spiritual Gift of Madness. It has a long subtitle, but the title is pretty short and catchy.
Yeah, it is. And, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially given what you're covering here, because in part of your book you do talk about the fact that there are, the mental health system is not correctly treating these illnesses, but you do mention later on that there is a spiritual side to this, in other words. And, there's more to it, the picture, than just that. And I'm going to try to see how much of that we can cover today. But yeah. I did get a question from Jennifer. She wanted to know, what about multiple personality disorder? I think she wants to know, basically, could that be caused by spiritual roots? If she's wrong, if I'm wrong, she can ask me. But she just put on here, what about multiple personality disorders? So I don't know what she means by it.
Well, it was that famous case by Sybil, where she wrote a book about a multiple personality disorder, and then a number of years later, the psychiatrist, I think, was forced to admit, or she was forced to admit that in fact, that they made it up. She didn't have a multiple personality disorder, in the sense of one personality not knowing where the other personality was going. That was a made-up construct by the psychiatrist. I've never actually, whether this exists or not, or, I'm a hypnotist. I haven't done it in a while, but I was trained in hypnosis afterwards. So, you could, put a person in a trance where, that whether they can have a multiple personality disorder, I've yet to meet anyone, actually, of all the thousands of people. I have yet to meet anyone that has displayed that, so I'm not clear whether you meet people who have different personalities, just like you or I. They seem to be different with different people and in different social contexts.
Yeah, and I think that if such a thing exists, and I could be wrong, it could be equally as possible that there's a other dimensional or a spiritual explanation for it, much like there would be for bipolar or schizophrenia. Like I've heard it said that we're in a multi-string universe. There are many different dimensions. That what if a person that has this multiple personality disorder is really exchanging places with other people in other realities? Their minds are, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you would think of that, but I thought I would throw it in there as food for thought, in other words.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that theory before. Yeah.
Well, I think I just the first one that came up with it, and I'm kind of like Bill Engvall. I get these unusual ideas. Well, most people would say we're unusual. But getting back to the subject at hand, the actual, book itself, two of the things that you target in your book, out of all the multitudes of disorders, are schizophrenia and bipolar. Are these the only two disorders that you would say are, could be related to spiritual causes?
Yeah, in most cases, most people I've met who have had spiritual experiences were people who were labeled schizophrenic, schizoaffective, or any of the so-called psychosis. In most cases, the person is going through a genuine crisis. But so frequently in these cases, a breakdown is an opportunity for a breakthrough, as Dr. R.D. Laing said in the 1967. And there are a number of places at that time in the 70s. Two most well-known were Soteria House, which I talk about somewhat, and Diabasis, which actually gave asylum to people who were supposedly schizophrenic. It was in the 70s, so I think, they picked, of course, as Thomas Osborne, who just died this weekend, as people don't know, he's the great warrior against psychiatry. He was a psychiatrist. He was 92 when he died. He wrote The Myth of Mental Illness. He also wrote a book on schizophrenia, where he called it, the book is called Schizophrenia, the Sacred Symbol of Psychiatry. And it was considered that when I was in graduate school, the most devastating mental illness of all. And for for most of the 19th and 20th century, it was considered incurable, quote unquote, incurable disease and all. So it's interesting when you study it that, as I have, and become friendly with people in the mental patients liberation movement, psychiatric survivors movement, now called the Mad Pride movement. So many of these people were told, you have a chronic mental illness, you will never get well. This is schizophrenia. This is the most dread disease known to man, mental disease known to mankind. I said mental disease, and now they say it's a brain disorder and it doesn't change. But there's so many people now who were given this kind of diagnosis who recovered, and it's not all a negative thing, as Soteria House showed. When they provided a kind of asylum, the word asylum originally means a place of rest. Of course, the big mental asylums of the 19th and 20th century were hardly places where people could go for healing and rest. But
those were more like torture chambers, weren't they?
Yeah.
Now, okay, I'm sorry. I was just going to mention to you real quick, like, that Jennifer went on to say a minute ago that Kathy O'Brien has multiple personality disorder, and Rosehan Barr does too, which this is the first I've heard of it. I'm going to look into it further, but I guess that's why she was asking. Now, also, she asked, what about borderline personality disorder?
Well, that's another disease that Diane, I believe Diane was, no, it was one of my other people that I interviewed for the book, and many people I've met. Kathy, what's her name? Katie Simon in the book, and they kept telling her she had which is a terrible kind of thing to tell someone they have a bipolar personality disorder. I've treated many people with this label, and it's just what it does is it makes it impossible for the person to really get on with their life. I was trained as a family therapist, so when I worked in the public sector, I used to get a lot of families, and I can think of one woman who had a so-called bipolar, but Kathy anyway got better by getting off the drugs. Of course, it means that the person is a borderline personality. It means that the person is incapable of forming real, meaningful relationships. And this is just a nonsensical, a really destructive thing to tell people. And in my opinion, this was not the case. And all the numerous people I've met who were labeled borderline personality disorders, psychiatrists have, become experts in finding ways to, as one of my colleagues called it, it's a diffusion of deficit language. You, instead of noticing people's strengths and helping them to build their strengths, as I believe psychologists and people with psychiatrists should do, they focus in on the ostensible weaknesses, the ostensible pathologies, and undermine people's self-confidence. So Katie will clearly prove that she didn't have a borderline personality disorder because she's been in a relationship now for 10 years. Yeah. So now this other woman, that is an interesting case who was told she had. In her case, she was incapable of. She had these relationship with her daughter, who was 15, and they were not getting along. The daughter moved out of the house and moved in with her friend, and the daughter was 15, so it's dealing with a teenager. And tell this story because it illustrates, I think, I could tell others how destructive these diagnoses are. There was a threat that the child welfare, this was in New Jersey, was threatening to remove the child from the mother's home, and that would have been a tragedy because she would have been thrown into. It's even more of a tragedy today with the statistics we have on the high number of people on drugs in the foster care institutions. But so what I did was at the time, which is what I would do today, was I investigated why were, let's call them Alice and Katie, but Katie, not the Katie in the book, Alice and Kathy, I'll call it. Alice being the mother, why was she not getting along? Why had the antagonism grown to such a great length that the daughter was actually moved away from home, and child welfare was threatening them coming in and saying, well, we have to solve this problem by breaking up the family. And then I had studied with Salvador Minuchin, and Minuchin, who was one of the great family therapists of the 20th century, one of his aphorisms is if the child is bigger than the mother or the father or the parents, it's probably because he or she is sitting on one of the other parent's shoulders. You get the meaning of that, or shall I explain it? I guess I'll explain it. Often what happens is that one of the parents is actually consciously or unconsciously undermining the other parent's ability to be a parent to the child. Now, in this case, it wasn't another parent involved, but I found that the daughter, Kathy, when she had fights with her mother, she would run to various members of the family, her uncles, and the uncles would then take her in, and they'd commiserate with her. So I decided I had to meet with the uncles as well as I had met with Alice, and I didn't think she had a borderline personality, any kind of personality. I don't really believe in any of these psychiatric labels. But
thank you.
Yeah.
Now, I really wanted to thank you, and I'm sorry to interrupt again, but this is a key point because, I've been noticing that it seems to me like psychiatrists are something of what you might call experts or masters of euphemisms. They'll take a rebel child, rebellious one, and label it OC, occupational defiant disorder or something of that nature, for example. Could it be that something like multiple personality could be a moody person and they just relabeled it that?
Yeah, that's a good, probably, that's very often, yeah. Same thing with attention deficit disorder. Yeah, I don't know what the antonym, Ross, is of euphemism. You said it's a euphemism. It's actually the opposite of a euphemism.
Okay.
I don't think there is an antonym, but I'll have to make one up sometime. But
well, I think this is what they actually do because, I've seen it before. They're just taking things that people have had for a long time, their symptoms, and giving them disorder names, disorder labels, in other words.
Yeah.
Who was it? It was in your book, in fact. I read it myself, and now I'm having a brain fart. Had made the comment, I think it was Peter Bregan, that attention deficit disorder should really be DADD, dad deficit disorder, that these are really children that just don't get enough attention from their dad.
That's Peter Bregan, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, it's the same thing we're talking about with the oppositional defiant disorder and the multiple personality. You have the symptoms or diagnosing symptoms and then just giving it a label other than what it's had all its life, telling you it's an illness and sticking meds in you.
Right. As the old saying is, if your only tool is a hammer, you treat everything as a nail. So when I got to the bottom of it with this woman Alice, and I got her and her daughter back together, what I found was the whole situation had been poisoned because Alice had been labeled borderline personality, and everybody knew she was seeing a psychologist, and they assumed that because she had this label, she wasn't capable of being a good mother. And so when I brought in the uncles and the aunts and Alice's mother, who was the grandmother, and I asked them to stand behind Alice and not to give the daughter a different message, because the aphorism being, the guiding rule being that if a child is bigger than the mother, she's sitting on someone else's shoulder in the family. So you have to have a consistent message by all members of the family. And once that happened, just immediately the problem disappeared. And during the whole time that I worked there, she was never moved out of the house again. They continued to fight, and I brought them, to argue sometimes, but they did it in a productive manner. The hardest part was convincing, but I was able to do that, convincing her mother that Alice was not a borderline personality disorder, but she might have been even called bipolar too. Depending on the psychiatrist they go to, there's not even any reliability about the labels. You'll find, like most of the people in my book, got a variety of different labels, as well as a variety of different psychiatric drugs. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like regular cocktail. Be honest with you, right now my wife is on a real cocktail, and she'd been passing out. We took her to ER, and the doctor there said she needed to go have her meds adjusted, that she was on a very bad cocktail of drugs. So I think what happens is doctors, they're supposed to read each other's notes, but when they do, they don't do it thoroughly, and they end up misprescribing.
Yeah. I mean, the people I know who become dependent on these, I encourage people not to become dependent on these drugs, because once they're on them, they're very difficult to get off, and nobody should ever get off these drugs abruptly. I mean, we've been on these drugs for 5 years. As Reagan has pointed out, every study's shown that when people get off the drugs abruptly, they're likely to have very dramatic side effects. Whereas studies show that if they do it gradually, they're much less likely. And in fact, the studies that have been claimed to show that people who are schizophrenic, for example, and are not taking their drugs are more likely to be rehospitalized are really studies that are they're more likely to be hospitalized, it turns out, in most of these studies, because they get off the drugs abruptly, and they have withdrawal effect, which causes rehospitalization. But if they get off the drugs slowly, the comparison is pretty much the same. And you find also a difference between long range and short range. I mean, effects. Very often particularly for people labeled schizophrenic or bipolar, the long-term effects of the psychiatric drugs are to undermine the functioning of the brain.
I'm not laughing at you, Seth. Jennifer just sat there and made the comment, that's why you guys need Obama. He wants to computerize medical notes throughout the states. About that remark I made a minute ago, and when she put that, that amused me, and while you were talking, I laughed, and I do apologize for that.
Yeah, it's okay.
Anyway, one of the things I was wanting to ask you is, because I see in your book at one point the American Psychiatric Association decided to accept drug company money. Could you tell my listeners, pardon me, a little bit more about how that come about and the effects of it?
Yeah,
Oh, wait, before you do, and pardon the interruption, a caller just now came in.
Okay.
Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, sir.
Hi.
Oh.
How are you?
Diane?
No, I don't think this is Jennifer?
That's right, sir.
Oh, okay. This is Jennifer, the one that was asking the questions.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, hi. How are you?
Okay, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Bear with me because I'm English and French, all right?
What?
Sometimes, pardon?
It's a little hard to hear, I'm sorry.
I said bear with me because I'm English and French, so sometimes my questions don't make sense.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm not from the States.
I see.
Yeah. Listen, I've been diagnosed with bipolar type 2 with borderline personality disorder, narcissist, paranoid psychotic disorder with COD. All right?
That's just terrible that they did that to you.
Well, listen,
I mean, this is like character assassination under the guise of medicine. Well,
at first, because I've been ill since I was 4, right?
What happened to you?
Well,
You're 4?
I'm 4 years old, and the first thing that I remember is that I'm looking outside my window, and all of a sudden, from my right ear, I can hear something from a distance. And it's not clear what it's saying. It sounds like something is singing to me, and I'm not really sure what's going on. All I know is that it feels normal to me, and ever since then I've been having a hard time sleeping naturally. Like, I'm talking about naturally.
Wait a minute, this is what so you heard a sound? How does that mean you're ill?
Well, you see, at first I thought I was normal. You know?
Mm-hmm.
I thought everybody heard these sounds. Like, it sounded like chanting. Like a very nice
beautiful.
chant.
That's beautiful.
Of course it is. Of course it is. It's very spiritual.
Yeah.
And as I got older, these chants started turning into words. You know, like, Jennifer, come here, come and close the door's unlocked. And obviously I would go upstairs and the door was unlocked. And
wow.
Yeah, and obviously, don't think I'm crazy or something like that, but I always thought it was angels. And as I grew older, I realized, well, not everybody hears these things. You know,
you were gifted, but the psychiatrist would never say that. You were gifted. Spiritually gifted.
Exactly. Yeah. And they would tell me, okay, well, go get your phone right now. Your sister's calling you. And the phone wouldn't be ringing, and I would have it in my hand, and then they said, okay, do it now. And it would just ring. And I'm, oh my God, like, they're telling me my sister's calling me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is the most beautiful thing. And at first I lost faith in the Lord.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I'm religious. I'm sorry that I'm actually forgiven, like, sorry, I'm saying sorry for this, but I'm not religious in the sense where it's church-wise, but I'm more on a spiritual level, and that I ask forgiveness for the Lord. Like, listen, I put you down, and I forgot about you all these years, and these Jehovah's Witness. As soon as I said that, these Jehovah's Witness came to my door and rang. And it was the first time that I ever got Jehovah's Witness. And they told me about
as soon as you said it.
And I came back in my house, I'm like, no matter what religion, this just proves to me that you're there. You know?
That what? That proves what?
It proves to me that you're there. Even like if it was Muslims.
Right, that God's there. Well, yeah, that's one of the major points. You illustrated, you're another person who illustrates one of the points in my book, that spiritual gifts that the universe is wider and deeper and more profound and mysterious than psychiatrists can imagine, and then they put nasty labels on people who are having spiritual experiences that they can't understand.
Exactly. But, however, I did start hearing, like, other things, like the devil and nasty things, you know, like
this was after you, was this before, when you started hearing the devil, was this before or after you started doubting yourself? How could I say, once I asked forgiveness of the Lord, for some reason, the devil, I don't know why the devil was after me, and then I had to go after this woman. We don't know the devil. It was some kind of evil spirit, right?
Of course, and I don't.
It said evil things? Is that why you said it was diabolic? It said evil things?
He didn't say evil things. It was literally coming after me. And I never believed that in evil spirit. I don't believe in your evil spirit.
But for how many? Wait a minute. What's your first name again?
Jennifer.
Jennifer. How many years were you having these angelic spirits communicating with you before the demons started coming? You made it sound like it was going on for quite a while before any of the evil spirits or the devil, as you put it.
24 years. And then
you had it for 24 years. 24 years you were having angels? Well, I'm calling them angels. Angelic spirits? They were all positive, and it was only 24 years afterwards that you began to hear voices from the devil?
Well, it was just one incident where I knew something evil was going to come after me, and then I started calling a bunch of Catholic churches around where I was living, and I'm like, I need an exorcist.
Oh,
and they're like, well, we can't give you one.
Well, they're going to send you to a psychiatrist or something, yeah.
And he said I needed a doctor. And
I wrote a whole book on that called Unholy Madness. This time I was using madness as a critical sense. The church's surrender to psychiatry. So, I mean, it's a real abdication of responsibility. I mean, churches are basically sending people over to an anti-Christian, atheistic cult. Psychiatry. It's another religion.
Well, you see, and I put myself in psychiatry, like, I brought myself to the emergency because I did want to kill myself, unfortunately. And
you what? Because you did want to what?
Pardon?
Why did you feel you had to go to the emergency room?
Well, it's because I wanted to commit suicide, and I had a plan, and I was literally going to go through with it. But the thing is,
how old were you at this? You were
I was
about
24.
You were 24 because I thought you said they started when you were 4. These voices, right? The angels.
Yeah, the angels started when I was 4.
Yeah.
But
okay, so this was 20 years. 20 years later that you're having.
Exactly. Well, hold on. 24. I'm 28. Hold on. I'm 28. I keep thinking in my head I'm 28. No, I'm 29. I keep thinking in my head I'm 28.
Wait a minute. You're only 29 today?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
And so no, I sent myself to the hospital at 26. I'm sorry. At 25, 26, in between, because I was turning 26. So I was 25. And because I had thoughts of suicide, and I really didn't want to commit suicide because I was living in my grandmother's building block, and I didn't want her to find me.
Yeah.
That would have broken my heart. And, and I had my cat, and I didn't want to leave her. That was the only thing that was clinging on during that time.
Jennifer, all of a son, there must have been, there's the thing with psychiatrists, they always try to blame it on some mental disease. They never ask what was going on in your life.
Well, the thing is that they did. Don't forget, well, I live in Canada.
Oh, you live in Canada? What part of Canada?
I live in Quebec.
In Quebec, yeah.
Yeah, here what they do in the medical world of Canada is they literally try to go back as much as you could remember. So I have to give my life story from 2 years old because I remember since I was 2.
Wow, that's amazing. Nowadays in America, they just put you on drugs and they don't want to hear anything.
They kept me in. So when I put myself in the hospital, they had to calm me down because I went to a psychotic attack. Like, I was ripping out my hair, I was drooling all over the place, I was talking nonsense. I didn't even know what I was talking about. I was throwing things.
You make it sound.
And well, the thing is that.
Are you saying you were possessed? Are you saying that?
But that's the thing. That's just a little bit before I started calling the churches.
Yeah.
And so they kept me there for literally 4 months. And
oh my God, that's terrible.
Yeah. They kept me in for 4 months in a hospital that I really despise. It's one of the worst hospitals in Montreal.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not the Allen Memorial where we all know that they zap you, and I did not want to go to the Allen because my uncle goes to the Allen for the same things that I have, and he gets zapped. That's where the MK Ultra started.
Yeah.
At the Allen Memorial in Montreal, and I did not want to go there. Everybody was saying, "Oh, you should go there. It's the best hospital." No. I've seen what they done.
Erwin Cameron, you're referring to,
that's
right?
That's right. And I don't want to go there. I mean, I see my uncle after he gets zapped. He looks like a walking vegetable. You know, I do not want to be a walking vegetable. I want to have my head. I want to have,
Yeah.
And so they kept me there for 4 months, and they observed me, obviously, interacting with other people, interacting with the nurses, and they came up with a cocktail, if you want. And obviously they put me on antidepressants, which is for my nerves, because I'm a very nervous person, and for my OCD and my depression for bipolar disorder. And then I have, which is these
are just terms they make
obviously.
Up.
And then they put me on Epival. I don't know if I'm saying that right, because I just know my medication in French. I'm sorry. And that is for my moods, because I have mood swings. And then I have, obviously, my Seroquel for my psychotic attacks.
Oh, my God.
Habits. And anti-babies is for my mood swings, for my rage, because I have high rage. And they gave me gabapentin for my active thoughts, and they gave me Lozex because I have acid reflux disease since I was 16, and a bunch of other pills. You see?
Well, these are all drug pushers for the drug companies.
Well, that's it, huh? And when I was there, at first I'm like, oh my God, they want to change me. They want to change who I am. And then I started reflecting in my room. Hospitals here are run by the government. And the government doesn't want me to be more intelligent, doesn't want me to communicate with the spiritual world, to know the reality and to know the truth. And then I started telling this to the doctor. I'm like, you guys just want to take me away. You guys want to tone me down so you don't see what everybody else sees, that you guys are corrupting.
Well, if you question them, then they call you paranoid. So.
Well, that's it. Then they wrote, like...
Paranoid?
Well, I'm paranoid, yeah, because...
Schizophrenic, yeah. That's what
I'm not. I did do my MRIs because here in Canada, what happens to be schizophrenic, you have to be, it has to show in the MRI.
No, it doesn't show. It's a lie. It doesn't show on the MRI. That's what we were talking about earlier. That's a lie that psychiatry made up. The only thing they've, in all these hundreds of years, the only thing they've been able to show is that people who are on the drugs have frontal lobe shrinkage. It's caused by the drugs. None of these so-called mental illnesses, which are really problems of living and spiritual experiences, none of them, none of them are caused by, for years they've been trying to prove, and they keep saying, well, we'll prove it next year or the year after. So if they told you they did an MRI and they had decided you had schizophrenia, they were lying to you.
Well, no, I don't have schizophrenia.
Whatever they told you,
we're very lucky. We're legally allowed to have access to our files whenever we want. And as soon as I do an MRI each time, because I've been doing it since I was a kid, I've always said, I want to see it. And legally they have to show me. So I've always seen.
They're lying to you. You don't know how to interpret it. There is no evidence that is anything different or wrong with your brain.
So you're saying that they got it in after, like the blog?
If he told you that, he's lying. Your brain, you have a normal brain. I don't know how long you've been on the drugs. Just a year.
Let me intercede something here, if I may. I know, like here in America, when you go in and get an MRI or a CAT scan, or any kind of test done, the people that do the testing, they don't know nothing about it. They have to send it to the doctor for interpretation. And a single doctor that wants to make money can point out any one thing that we don't know about what we're reading and tell us it's an illness, and it could be a coffee stain for all we would know.
Yeah, he could take Billy Joel's and put it on your oh my Lord, that is terrible.
Anyway,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can tell you there's nothing wrong with your brain.
Oh, I like the way you say that. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
But, since I have been taking the medication, I do feel different. But I feel calmer. I make sense, and
wait a minute, you're still taking all these 10 different drugs now?
Yeah,
I call them drugs. I mean, I think it's a euphemism to call them medication because, as I said, they themselves admit that they have no evidence that there's any kind of biochemical imbalance, and therefore the drugs don't correct any kind of biochemical imbalance. There's no evidence there is a biochemical imbalance, and there's no proof that there is a chemical, and so so they basically have you on a variety of different drugs, and
that's right.
And your problem didn't start until you were 24, you're saying, right? That's what you said.
Well, the evil problem didn't start.
Well, sure, you were hearing angels. I mean, that was a beautiful thing. And you're telling me that your life up until 24 was a pretty good life?
No, it wasn't. That's the thing.
Okay, what happened? We don't know.
Violent.
What?
I was violent. I would scream.
Well, when did this happen? I thought you said it started when you were 24.
Well, the angelics, yes, but the outlashes and everything else, it was still there. Like
when did these out?
I'm black and white.
What?
I'm black and white. I didn't want my parents touching me. There was a lot of home problems. Like, my mother's an alcoholic, and I was beaten.
Okay, wait a minute now, Jennifer. Here we're getting to the root of your emotional problems. And the psychiatrists are telling you this, even though they've done thousands of studies and haven't been able to demonstrate there's anything wrong with anybody's brain except the people who are, people on the drugs. We know the drugs cause shrinkage, and they're overlooking these things, your mother being an alcoholic, all these things that are causing, would cause any normal person to become traumatized. They're overlooking them all together and telling you there's something wrong with your brain. Take our medicine.
Well, you see, here in Canada, they don't keep you on long-term medication. They actually push you for psychotherapy, which is long-term, where you could, because you have to understand that here what they consider mental illness and disorder is two different things. A mental illness is there to keep, like you said, like they say, it's an chemical unbalancement, and which you say that it does not exist in the brain, which I don't know. That I'm not a doctor. I'm sorry if I beg to differ or not. And a disorder is something that traumatizes the brain, and you have a hard time living with it, such as an emotional disorder. Like, you don't know how to take it, when the emotional comes, which a disorder you can live with once you have the tools to live with it, and you can literally live without medication. And
you could live with it what?
Pardon?
I didn't hear. You could live with it. What about the drugs, the medication, as you call it?
And the medication, what they do is that once you did your therapy, your psychotherapy, you could start during the psychotherapy. What they start doing is that they take you slowly off the drugs so you can live with your disorder. So you could.
Well, how can they never tell you can get over your disorder?
No.
The brain wants you to believe that you have a permanent disorder.
Well, what they say is that it's there for life, but it's livable. You can live with it.
This is self-fulfilling prophecy. It's there for life. That way they ensure they'll have clients that will keep coming back.
Apparently that's how they do it. That's what my doctor said. Because it took me years, because she's always said, my doctor's like, you have borderline personality disorder, you have this.
Yeah, well, they have it. They
always repulsed and, no, I don't, and I would scream and I would throw things and I would leave and I'm like, maybe I do, but but she's always said it, you just need long-term therapy, you just need to know, like when I see somebody drunk, it just reminds me of my luck all the time, so I go and hide. And I don't feel good, but I don't know how to deal with it. So the psychotherapy, like you said, would make you literally stand in front of the person who is drunk.
It would make you do what? The psychotherapy would do?
It would help me to be in front of the person that is drunk and not remind me of my mother. Because
Okay, that's a good therapeutic technique. Did it work?
That's right. Well, that's the thing. Here in Canada, they don't push for psychotic psychotherapy. Psychotherapy, they call it in French. They don't push for that type of therapy. So there's not a lot in each city.
Desensitization is what it's called. Yeah.
And so basically, I've been waiting for over 2 years now, and I'm just sitting on my bed waiting because they don't want to put me back to work. Because I'm a danger to myself and others.
Right, they told you you're a danger to yourself?
And others, yeah.
What?
Because I've been to the hospital too many times.
So you're not doing anything with your life now?
Well, no, the doctor said, Jen, he's like, what do you like? I don't know, going out with my friends, and He's like, okay, what else? And I didn't know what else to say. And he's like, why don't you sit at home and figure out what you want and try it? Because I don't know myself. You see, the thing with borderline personality disorder is that you don't know yourself. And like he said, he's like, Jen, you know, like I could read things from 5 years ago because I've always had the same doctor. Like, and then today you fully contradict yourself. He said these are all the things that borderline personality disorder has.
Oh, Jennifer, what if you just stopped thinking that you had a borderline personality disorder? I mean, what if you gave that idea up and just thought of yourself as a person who was dealing with problems resulting from what? You mentioned your mother being an alcoholic. What other kinds of problems? You had like normal responses to these problems. But I could get out there DSM-3, you know, the borderline personality disorder, and as I said earlier, I don't believe it at all. You don't have any friends?
Of course I do. I'm just the worst thing.
Well, they claim that your borderline personalities are incapable of having a meaningful friendship.
Exactly. And I have friends since I was a kid, and I mean, I'm living with one now. I mean, it's very hard.
You have many friends, you say?
Of course I have many friends, and I'm very lucky to even have one friend because...
Okay, so you don't have okay, you disprove them. You don't have a borderline personality disorder. By their own criteria, you don't fit.
Well, that's the point. Like,
you're putting yourself in the hands, but you're putting yourself in the hands of people who are trying to undermine your self-confidence.
And that's what I don't have anymore.
Yeah.
It's shattered.
It's no wonder after you've gone to all these experts for all these years, and these experts to interpret every single good thing that's happened to you, like angels and the positive spirits that were happening, since they don't believe in another world. You know, the other world doesn't exist, and anybody who does...
A doctor does, actually. My general doctor does.
Well, general doctors tend to be better than psychiatrists.
Well, and he's also in the mental health service. So he's like 2 in 1. I had to have a family doctor like that. So, because I have my mother, and then I have my great-grandmother that's schizophrenic, and my...
Well, look at this. I mean, these are why this doesn't cause any brain damage. These are just problems, difficult problems of life that you've had to deal with. And really, you should have gotten a therapist who would encourage you and told you what a good job you've done dealing with these problems that are more than most people have. Living with a mother who's an alcohol abuser and a grandmother who has problems, and they're all victims of I'm sure, the psychiatrists who undermine their self-confidence by telling them they also had chronic diseases. They never, Jennifer, the research you can see in Bob Whitaker's book, or Bragan's book, shows that the people are much more likely to recover from so-called schizophrenia. I don't believe in schizophrenia, but you look at the statistic rates if they're not on the drugs. So, they're undermining people's, people they get plugged into the mental health system, and they're told, you will never get better. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. There is evidence of self-fulfilling prophecies. Are you aware of that?
Of course. What? Of course.
Yeah.
There's so much of it.
Do you know, for example, about the placebo effect? Did you know that is very high? For example, among people who are depressed, you can give half of those people a sugar pill, and they will get better. There's a 50% improvement rate with the placebo. Well, what does placebo mean? It means they expect to get better.
Of course. All in
So
my head.
if you surround yourself with positive people who tell you you're going to get better, you're going to get better. If you surround yourself with people who tell you you have a chronic disease, you're borderline personality, you're bipolar, we have 10 lists of mental diseases to tell you you suffer from, and then we're going to take you in here and do an x-ray of your brain and there's something wrong with your brain. I mean, you have basically put yourself under a psychiatric curse.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. Thank you. I'm sorry, sir. I took so much time.
Yeah,
Well,
I wanted to point
it's
out.
an interesting story. It's very helpful for the public. I mean, these were the two main things, your mother being an alcoholic. What about your father?
My father wasn't really in the picture. I mean, like, we always known him, but he worked days and slept nights, and weekends he would go out golfing, just avoiding the situation.
So you didn't have a father there supporting you either.
No, and when he finally took us in by force by his girlfriend, once my parents separated and divorced.
Wait a minute, how old were you when they separated? Or divorced?
Here the law says that you gotta separate for 1 year and then divorce after.
Yeah,
so they separated when I was 7, and then retried, and then re-separated at 8 and divorced at 9.
Was that painful, difficult, traumatizing?
No, I told my father to separate with my mother. Well, divorce my mother at 5.
Yeah.
Like I'll always remember, he was doing laundry, and I went downstairs and I said, "Dad," in French, I said, "Dad, just separate Mom. Just get away from her." And I thought he was going to take us because she was so drunk. I mean, we found the neighbor found her under the bed during they were sleeping, and my mother was under the bed because she thought that they stole my baby ring, and she was paranoid, and she was just so drunk, and then we found her under the bed.
This must have been terrifying for you.
Well, of course it is. I mean, it's trauma. It's literally trauma, and being starved with food in the house, and we weren't allowed to eat, and if we did, we got beaten. We got beatings. And
you got beaten?
Yeah, we did. All 3 of them.
And you were starved? My God.
Yeah. I'm a tough girl today, though.
And did you manage to, yeah, go on.
No, go on. Sorry. Go.
Did you manage to finish school? How could you concentrate on school? School and all this.
School was my safe place. It was my haven. It was. I had to go to school. I don't care if I had. Once my brother chased after me with a saw in the house.
A saw?
A saw. Yeah. We were becoming violent because that's all we knew, right? He was 6. And I woke him up to go to school.
Your brother?
Yeah. And chased me after a saw. And the only place in the house that would lock are the bathrooms. There was one downstairs and one upstairs. And the garage door would lock, but only from the inside and not from the garage side. And I locked myself in there, and I was already changed. Everything, just I didn't have shoes on, and I'm like, well, I have to go to school. I have to go. I'm gonna miss my bus. And this kid is trying to come in. I just jumped out of the window. I'm like, I don't care. I sprained my ankle. It was swollen. I had socks on. I ran to the bus stop. My bus driver picked me up. I got to school. I put on my running shoes from gym class, and I carried on with my day. And of course, when I got home, because I didn't wait for 2 kids, I got in trouble, right? Because I had my sister and my brother. But I didn't care. And when I got home, I would lock myself back in the bathroom and do my homework.
Lock yourself where?
In the bathroom. I would always lock myself in the bathroom.
Wow, so you were in a state of terror, right?
Of course, terror.
It's almost like really it's like being in a concentration camp.
It was a concentration camp, but I mean, it wasn't as bad. I mean, I do feel for the millions of Jewish people that did, but I mean, it was terror. I mean, I didn't want to come in, so I did a bunch of smoke outside to go my stress because I was always shaking and I was just so terrified, and I would bring my brother and my sister along. So at one point we were best friends, you know, until like recently.
Your brother and sister when you were best friends?
All three of us. I mean, me and my sister only have a year and 5 months apart.
You're older?
And I'm the oldest, and a year and 5 months apart, me and my sister, and 3 years, me and my brother.
Yeah.
So 3 years and 8 months.
Uh-huh.
We all have the same, even today, we all have the same friends. But you see, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have friends. Because, I mean, I did do a lot of bad things to my friends. And then my sister would always back me up. Oh, you know, like, she's just like that. You know, Jennifer's just like that. You have to...
She's a what? Jennifer's a what?
Jennifer's just like that, you know.
Oh.
Like, my sister would always have to explain to everybody why I was so odd. Like, I would do the oddest things. I would eat grass, you know, and my sister would just...
Well, really? You became self-destructive, huh?
Well, I mean, eating grass is not the...
Oh, grass. I thought you said glass.
No. Grass.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought in my head, I'm like, well... I started this at 10 years old. I'm like, if the cows eat it, then it shouldn't be bad for me because I eat their meat and I drink their milk. So in my head, I'm like, it should be irritating, you know? So then I started eating grass because obviously there was nothing else to eat at home. And for the little things that we got away with it,
wow.
And my sister eat the food. Like, there was 2 potatoes that were, like, in the far cupboard. And then my sister's like, I found 2 potatoes. I'm like, you share it with Mark. You and Mark eat it. I'm going to go outside and eat grass. You know, like, they needed it the most. They were so weak, and my sister was the worst. That got beaten, and she was... And I always have to eat. She was a nervous wreck, and I just knew that. I just knew that they needed nourishment and they needed this support. And I would hold them at night sometimes, and they would cry in my arms. I would do their homework, and that was more nourishing to me because I felt more like a mother. I
felt more what?
Pardon?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last thing you said.
I said it was nourishing to me, like in a mother nature type of way. Like, it was more so natural, you know?
You're kind of breaking up, Jennifer, a little bit.
I'm sorry. I think it's my throat.
So what, did you, you were nurturing, but did you finish school?
Yes,
High school?
I did. I'm the only one
so
that did.
in despite of all this living in this horrible situation, you were still able to concentrate on your schoolwork?
Yes, sir.
Well, that shows extraordinary ability.
That was the only drive. And you see, I have a language handicap, they call it, at a 7.5. I have no idea what it means, where I have a hard time assimilating words, where I cannot write, read, and talk.
What do you mean you cannot write, read, and talk? You're talking?
Yes, it's all because I've been talking just English nowadays.
Because what?
Because I've been talking English. As soon as I start talking French, then my mouth, my brain, they cannot come together and speak properly.
Oh, that's a very interesting thing. But you did graduate high school then.
I graduated high school. I went to accounting, and they told me that I wasn't able to because with my dyslexia.
Well, this shows extraordinary strength that here you are in living in a concentration camp situation, and you were able to concentrate and to actually accomplish all that you accomplished.
And you see, I did accounting, I did hairdressing, I did Excel Pro, I did business, I did so much school.
Yeah.
And today I'm sitting on it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yes, sir?
I was going to say that you two could probably get together on an interview on one of Seth's future books. What do you think, Seth?
Sure. Yeah.
Wow. It was my dream to write a book, though.
You know, Jennifer, his website is www.sethfarber.com, and he's got a contact link on there.
Seth H. Farber.
Oh, is that an H in there?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Sure enough, that got right past me with that H right behind it. I mean...
Yeah. I try to capitalize the middle H so it stands out when I write it. Yeah.
It kind of runs together like one word and you kind of miss it.
I don't know how
that
happened.
I'm taking a lot of radio time. So, Mr. Seth, what I'm going to do is I'm going to contact you on your website.
Yeah, it has my email. My email is Seth17279 @AOL.com.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, what you told us basically is a success story until you went to the psychiatrist. Then it becomes a tragic story because now you're on drugs that are going to shorten your life and cause all kinds of problems when you 5, 10, or 15 years from now, if not sooner. I mean, a success story because really you went through this horrific situation and you were still able to make the accomplishments you made.
I did a lot of them, and I'm not a terrible person. I helped a lot of people.
I think it's really a crime that these psychiatrists told you were bipolar, borderline personality, and that you'd always be mentally ill. That's a crime against the human spirit.
That's what I felt when I was at the hospital for 4 months.
Yeah.
Because of medication. So, I'm sorry, I'm going to let you go because I'm taking up radio time.
Mm-hmm.
And we have been on the phone for half an hour.
Thanks for telling us the story. I hope other people take inspiration from it, except for the part about going to the psychiatrist and see that in spite of all the trauma and the horrific situation, and that was the cause of your problems later in life, the evil, what I would call the evil spirits taking over, the trauma. I mean, we know that there's a high degree of trauma among people who are in psychiatric hospitals. There's nothing to do with their having something wrong with their brain. There's nothing wrong with your brain.
Thank you. It feels good hearing that. There we go.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I'm going to email you, sir, and hopefully talk in the future.
Okay, yeah, do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for calling in, Jen.
I'm so sorry for taking so much radio time.
No, I think it was helpful to people.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right.
Jen.
Thank you. Bye.
Uh-huh.
Wow, calling all the way from Montreal.
Yeah, that's quite a hike.
Most of your listeners are from the local area, are they not?
Actually, my callers can be from almost anywhere.
Really?
Well, yes and no. I mean...
Not too many from Canada, though, right?
No, not as a rule. I mean, not callers. I get some guests from Canada.
Yes, yeah.
It's kind of a long story. I've gotten a world subscription through Skype that enables me to contact 40 different countries around the globe at a rate of about $12 a month.
Yeah.
So, it's a pretty good deal. I can talk as long as I want to any one of those countries, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I meant when I said on Sean I couldn't call him. He's not a part of that subscription. So I just Skype called him, like an instant message. But at any rate, I was going to say we still got quite a bit of ground to cover, and we've got 6 minutes to cover it in.
Oh, that went quickly.
Do you want to ride over? Do you want to maybe do a reschedule, or what do you want to do?
Yeah, ride over. Yeah, sure. But are there other guests? I mean, are there other callers?
No, there's no other callers right now.
Mm-hmm.
There may be, you never can tell. I mean, somebody might call in, but no, not right at the moment. But I was going to say, really, and in all honesty, I've only asked you one question that I put on this list.
I didn't, yeah.
I read your book. I made a list of about 24 questions, but I've talked to you about everything except that one, the first one that was on the list.
Oh.
That's what I meant by a lot of ground, but we couldn't cover 24 questions in the next half hour anyway. But I thought that why don't we, before we cut this thing loose, at least give you a chance to cover some important stuff that you wanted to get out there, because I'm pretty sure you know what parts are important to you. I know you wanted us to get around to the part about the breakthrough that bipolar and schizophrenia appear to be linked to mysticism, a prophet or a shaman or something of this nature, right?
Yeah. Mhm. That's true. That's probably the thing that makes my book unusual. There are not a lot of books out there, particularly not a lot of books. My first book was called Madness, Heresy in the Room of Angels, and that also was about people. I think I interviewed 7 or 8 people, all of whom had spiritual experiences. And these experiences, as I said, were not all positive, but they had experiences sometimes of angels, sometimes there are other realities that people are aware of. R.D. Lang was the first to point this out. No, not the first. It was actually Anton Boyson, but there are others in other centuries, but certainly the first to popularize the idea. For example, I'll quote him. I quoted this in the book. He says, "If the human race survives, future men will look back on an enlightened epoch as a veritable age of darkness, the last on us. They will see that what we call schizophrenia was one of the forms in which, often through quite ordinary people, the light began to break in the cracks in our all too closed minds." So, for many people, these traumas and experience is their first opening to experience of an alternative kinds of realities, and that is everyone that I've met. Now, almost everyone I've met that's been labeled schizophrenic or bipolar has had these kinds of experiences that don't often happen to normal people. Diane, she was not. We could talk about. For example, if Jennifer had angels talking to her. It's quite common for people who've been labeled. Usually, the voices are saying negative things. But often they're saying helpful, positive things. I know someone who was labeled mentally ill who has a voice that accompanies now all the time that gives her guidance. And of course, you go to a psychiatrist and they're going to say that's mental illness. So, really, the beginning of or a lot of this is another dimension of beings from other dimensions that are communicating and with us. And since this is beyond the understanding of psychiatrists, it gets labeled mental illness. So Lang's theory, which was I hope to show in my book, was that breakdowns could be a breakthrough and a breakthrough to another reality. One of the often there are people who actually feel that God is talking to them. You know, Thomas Zah's myth, the psychiatrist who wrote the myth of mental illness, one of his more well-known aphorisms was that if you speak to God, they call it praying. If God speaks to you, they call it schizophrenia. So
that's an interesting point.
Yeah. There's a whole proscription, taboo against certain things that the R.D. Laing called the mind police. I mean, they are basically policing a very narrow kind of vision of reality. And if you step off the grass, they come in and like this poor young woman. They gave her bipolar and narcissistic and a whole list of really negative things about the person, instead of seeing how their abilities, her strengths, instead of focusing on the strengths, the fact that someone underwent such a travail and emerged from it as a strong. But if she had a decent psychiatrist, which is very hard to find, someone who takes Dr. Bragan's position, they would have spent time with her and they would have validated her strengths. And
much the same way you were just doing.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well,
and,
okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to talk about, just say that there's this other woman that who felt that God had a plan for her to save the world. Now, of course, psychiatrists, I believe, this is one of the most controversial aspects of my book. I was in the Christian church for a number of years. I joined the Eastern Orthodox Church. I've also been influenced by Eastern religions, so I'm familiar with different religions. I still, consider myself a Christian of sorts. That God was, I call this, and there's a lot of evidence, I believe that she was given a calling by God. I would call her Serene. I mentioned it in my book. She says, I have conversations with God, and He has told me how He plans to bring together the plan for the ages, or how He's going to bring about global awareness. Now, every time I go into mania, I am consumed by it. When I come out of it, I am normal, but I still believe it. I mean, what better thing is there to believe in God has chosen you to do an earthly mission for Him? Now, Ross, I actually will take a little extra time to say that I wrote this, if it's okay, I wrote this woman and I said, I think you're right. I think God does have a plan for you. Now, now this, of course, no psychiatrist would say that. Immediately they had her labeled bipolar, mania, delusions of grandeur. I could go through the whole psychoanalytic analysis of how they would see her, which is the exact opposite of the way I see it, because I believe in God, and I believe God has messengers, and I believe that God wants us to make the world a different place. I don't believe that in America, unfortunately, we worship money. I mean, here you have people running for office in which it becomes a sin to take any money away from the richest people in the 20, this is Occupy Wall Street, but the 250 350 richest people in the world have more money than the half of the world, than half of the world combined, who's living in poverty. And so Serene, who was supposedly mentally ill, who had this experience, she describes these experiences of what I call the kingdom of God on earth. Now, in all my studies of religion and Christianity and Hinduism, I believe that it is God's intention, God's will, to create the kingdom of heaven on earth for all human beings. And that requires a major transformation of our way of life. For example, as I said, the idolatry is to worship money more than God. That's the major source of it's funny, I was listening to Bill Maher, who's a famous atheist, the comedian, and he was not an atheist, obviously, but he was saying the same thing, that we worship money in America.
Well, we do. What do you think the problem with psychiatry is now?
Yeah, that's right. And in America, in God we trust is on the dollar bill. And if this was an atheist that was making the same point, which was kind of ironic, I thought. And Serene described in very beautiful terms, this is a woman who, you take her to any psychiatrist except someone like Peter Bregan, and they would tell you that this woman is mentally ill. And yet, she described, and when I wrote her, and I said I'm a psychologist, I told her, I don't think you're mentally ill, I don't think mental illness. She thought that I was crazy. She didn't believe I'm a psychologist, I don't think. And she said to me, what kind of mental illness do you have? I've never been labeled mentally ill. Of course, I don't, generally discuss my ideas with psychiatrists except the ones that agree with me.
Well, actually, I've been diagnosed as ADHD, hyperactivity disorder, and later in life, borderline intelligent functioning.
Yeah, you told me about the ADHD. Now, what is the last one? That's a new one.
Borderline intelligent functioning.
Does that mean that you're on the border of functioning intelligently?
That's what I would think to hear it.
Like you're almost retarded or something?
That's what it sounded like, to be honest with you.
Did they know you have a radio show at all?
Well, actually, I've told other people about it, and they thought the guy that gave me the diagnosis was something wrong with him.
Yeah.
Because, I can go talk to my son's school teacher, and she'll tell me that I sound like I graduated college.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I leave this impression with school teachers, yet this guy come up with that?
Didn't you tell me you've written books?
No, I haven't written books. I've thought about it.
Oh, mm-hmm. Yeah.
I said I've read them, I've studied. I do a lot of studying.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's quite clear to anybody who runs radio. Yeah, this is what they do. This is what they do. This is what they specialize in, demeaning and degrading people and undermining their self-confidence.
Now, also, I was wanting to ask you real quick, like while I still got you, if you agree with Paul Levy, are we all sharing a dream?
Oh, yeah, I like Paul's idea, awaken from the dream. Yeah, I've had that. I've had that experience, and it's one of the psychiatrists would have a nasty word for that. They have a nasty word for all the whole rich gamut of spiritual experiences, both good and bad, that have been known to mankind. In fact, one of the guys in my book who had these fantastic spiritual experiences, Ed Whitney, Dr. Whitney. I
was going to ask you about him next, because I read that at one point in your book he thought he was the Messiah, and then later on he thought he was Satan himself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You read that? Yeah.
Yes, I did.
That's yeah. That he was having a both experiences are commonly known to spiritual people who are familiar with the other world and the, as I said, the rich. This is why I said that I believe that it's really the messianic consciousness, as Paul Levy called it, the Christification of the many. If all of us were to take on the responsibility of being priests of God, as it says in the Bible, and treating life as sacred and each other as sacred and as all living things as sacred, rather than thinking of them as resources to be exploited in order to make more money, we'd live in a different universe. We'd live in the universe that Serene described. I didn't read it yet because you had other questions, but what I call the kingdom of God on earth. The kingdom of God on earth is, you have to be, as Jesus said, like a child to enter it. In other words, a child has a naivete, a trust in God, and doesn't think of himself as superior to other children, to other human beings, and all these this kind of so if we we're living actually, for example, there's been such a sabotage of the original Christian message. Most Christians don't even believe in the teachings of Jesus.
Oh, that is so true.
Yeah.
We could be on that one for hours.
Yeah. Oh, you've discovered, you're familiar with that.
Oh, yeah, my dad was a Pentecostal preacher, and my whole family is Pentecostal and all of that, and I'm kind of like the black sheep of the family because I'm into spirituality.
Do you consider yourself Christian or what?
No, I consider myself a part of God's creation and one of His children.
Yeah.
I don't think
you're open to all religion.
Right, I don't buy into to me a religion is like a psychiatrist label.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, Presbyterian, Buddhist, you know, either you're serving God or you're not serving God. Doesn't matter what label you want to put on yourself. Yeah,
I agree with that. But the teachings of Jesus I found to be very inspiring. But you know, then they say that it doesn't apply. The teachings of Jesus we should postpone until after Jesus comes back. This is what the fundamentalists say. I don't know if this is what your father actually said. I'm not talking. I mean, to me, growing up in New York, this was you know, because I grew up in a Jewish family that didn't really believe in God. You know, my mother believed in God, would pray to God when there was a crisis. Somebody was sick or something. You know, maybe they had some belief. But, you know, I don't regret not being brainwashed in Sunday school or whatever. I developed my spiritual...
I mean, okay, for separating your experience at church and religion, because this is what I talk to people about, is I don't believe in religion. You know, religion to me is a man-made deal. I don't care if it's Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, and I'm not saying they don't have their place. I'm just saying they're all man-made organizations and institutions, and as such, they're not perfect, and they don't have all your answers.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. Well, that's why I think one of the tragic things is that the teachings of think how the world would be transformed if people read the Sermon on the Mount and took it seriously and said this is the way we should live.
That is a very strong spiritual teaching right there.
Yeah. I mean, you take these fundamentalists. This to me was a shock when I learned it growing up in New York, where people don't go around quoting the Bible. And in fact, most people I know are atheists, and they look down on me as some kind of weirdo because I believe in God.
Yeah.
That's probably the opposite of Texas, right?
Well, yeah, we're right down in the middle of the Bible Belt down here. Are you, I want to make sure I don't let you leave here without asking this question.
Now, let me just say that, finish,
go ahead.
Can you remember the question?
Yeah.
I just want to say that people I read that the fundamentalists like Jerry Falwell and all those people say
John
the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount are not supposed to apply until after Jesus comes back.
What a crock.
That's just backwards.
That is a crock. I'm sorry. I'm just going to be blunt. I'm something of a redneck, hence the title Redneck Radio Man, and like a true redneck, I blurt, and I'm sorry. That is meant for our lives today, and if you can say that it was meant for heaven, then you don't understand what you're reading.
Yeah, that's how they get away with, like the death penalty. Now, I don't want to get into the whole thing. I want to answer your question, but we don't even have the expectation that people will might actually be reborn. In fact, the one woman who was reborn, they executed her in Texas anyway. You know what I'm referring to?
No.
Carla Faye Tucker.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, yeah, that was kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean, she became a born-again Christian. I don't care how they become reborn, but, reborn, we would call it reborn. I like the word reborn, except, it's often used to say you have to be a Christian to be reborn. But I've seen many people regenerated, rechanged, reborn in various different ways and manners. But they don't even have. So that's how they get around. How come all these Christians are for the death penalty? They don't take seriously the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount. If we took seriously the teaching, and this is what this schizophrenic woman said to me, she labeled bipolar with schizophrenic. I could quote if we have time. This is how she described the kingdom of heaven on earth. This is a wise woman, a very wise woman.
You're talking about, because she was talking about in God's creation there is no duality, and she explained how the Jews broke it down. Is that the part you're talking about?
No, which one is this?
Katie, what was her name?
Katie was the one person I interviewed that was an agnostic, didn't believe in God. I had trouble getting.
Katie Simon, wasn't she?
Yeah,
the one
maybe Chaya Grossberg.
Didn't she come to believe in God further on? No.
Chaya did.
Okay, I might be getting them mixed up.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead with the quote.
You wanted to ask your question, so
okay, but don't forget your quote then. But yeah. I mean, this is something that is not covered in your book, but it's something that I think has merit to your case, and that is: are you by any chance aware of mental illness studies done on Native Americans, and I mean specifically the ones living on reservations for psychosis?
No, I'm not aware of them, but I'm sure it's pretty high within those kinds of environments.
Well, I would actually think that there would be there may not be any psychosis amongst the ones living on the reservation, and it might be simply because they don't have psychiatrists and haven't been diagnosed with it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, I thought you had the answer to that question.
No, it's not that I had the answer. It's just that I'm thinking if you ever looked into that, you might find a whole new area that kind of strengthens the case for the Mad Pride movement, in other words.
Well, of course, Native American, if you looked at Native American society before they were decimated by the white Europeans, they had all kinds of, that's the point I made in my first book over and over again. Shamans would be considered, Native American shaman would be considered schizophrenic by psychiatric standard.
But yet they were considered the healers of the tribe.
Yeah.
On the reservation.
Yeah. That's what you had in mind? Because that's what I'm... Yeah, in one of my articles I said, yesterday's shaman is today's chronic schizophrenic. The kind of person who in a previous era it would have been considered a medicine man or a spiritual healer is today considered a victim of the most serious mental illness known to mankind. And there was one study done by Julian Silverman on Native American healers, actually. It's only the one study I know. And it was called, he was an anthropologist, called Shamanism and Acute Schizophrenia. It was published in the American Anthropologist in 1967. And he found that the experience of the neophyte shaman, the person who is not, is just having his first shamanic experience where they go out and they wait for the voices or whatever, and they wait for the spirit to guide them. That experience is identical in terms of in terms of a number of criteria, what it's like, breakdown, the hearing of the traumas and so on and so forth, to the experience that a schizophrenic has. So that's one study I know that was based just on comparing several people. So the idea would be that we could initiate people who are schizophrenics into instead of and R.T. Lang made this point in the psychiatrist R.T. Lang made this point in the Politics of Experience. Instead of initiating them, so to speak, instead of inducing them into lifetime roles as chronic mental patients, getting them on drugs and keeping them on drugs, what if we, initiated them into becoming the spiritual healers of our culture?
Right.
And I am actually one of my theories of my new book is they could be the prophets, because we find that there are certain things that the schizophrenic or the bipolar has in common with the prophets. The people who became prophets, like St. Paul, Jesus, to pick the two most famous, Isaiah. I mean, it wasn't all psychiatrists make it seem like, well, they have no understanding of spirituality anyway, so any spiritual phenomenon is for them. So, to go back to one of your other points, Whitney, Dr. Whitney had an experience with Christ, that he was a Christ figure, but now Paul Levy, who had this dream experience, believed that we were living in a dream, and I believe, also that we can change the dream. I've had the experience where I felt it was like a dream, we're dreaming together, and that we could change the dream if we convince enough people that we don't to believe in God rather than in money, and to love to take the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount, for example, seriously. So Paul, I like it. He felt he was the Messiah. I want to see more Messiahs. This is the point in my book. I believe in these people. I mean, I could quote. I was going to quote this thing from Serene. This is like a 2-minute quote, so you can tell me when you're ready for it.
Go for it. I'm ready.
Oh, okay. Now, this is a woman that was, told that she was chronically, they always say chronically, like this poor Jennifer told she would never get better. I want to empower these people to be prophets. That's really my belief after 25 years of working with in various capacities as a therapist, as an advocate, as a friend, as a comrade, that these are some of the most enlightened people on the planet. I want to empower them to be prophets, and the prophet not only points out the evil in the culture and how it's caused by idolatry, she also enlarges people's sense of what's possible. So Serene said, Jesus is incredibly real and heaven on earth. We can't see it. We're blind, mute, and deaf to it. We're creatures of light, of truth, yet live in the darkness of our humanity. Jesus said we are all gods. When the time comes, our eyes and our hearts will be opened, and we will see what is love. Our hearts will be filled with fire to light that darkness. And the 2 commandments, love God above all things. How could we not, with a direct relationship with Him? and love your neighbor as ourselves, we will have no more wars. The wars here on earth, I believe, mostly to be in our own heads. That would kind of, most religions do not think God is love. Where does that come from? When love is the most important thing on earth and heaven. I'm continuing to read from this woman who every psychiatrist said was psychotic. I have spent much of my early years searching for God in all living things. He is there, and all living things have a spirit, and you can communicate with that spirit using your own. But we are not using our spirits. We use our brains. Most don't even acknowledge the existence of spirits or God. The time will come, I tell you, we will be aware of the most prominent parts of ourselves, our spirit, and we will know God, the spirit that flows through all things. Anyway, that's the main part of what she said. Here she says here, she also is describing, now all of these people, the majority of these people who are described as by the psychiatric establishment as chronic schizophrenics and chronic bipolars have this experience of the kingdom of God on earth. And if other normal people could take it seriously, and not like it's something Jesus was going to do for us, but that Jesus asked us to do. I think St. Paul said, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. She says, I think we will no longer feel pain and no longer feel any evil thoughts. We will be able to speak to all things, and we will do different things on earth. Different desires will come into play. She said, I was being told to gather earth children. There was many people around who were in on the conversation. We were speaking telepathically, as they were in different countries, and it spread all over North America. Anyway, they convinced this poor young woman that she was schizophrenic, and she was out there way off in the wilderness. I tried to reach her. I couldn't talk to her because she was living with her mother, but I tried to email. I did email her, but she didn't believe me. I was crazy myself. So she was having the devil would experience too, because I don't say that the devil's not real, but I think God is stronger if we believe in God. But if we end up doing the devil's work, and that's what psychiatry is doing, that's what all these people who put money over, when they start, the military starts it's actually the politicians that start the wars. When they start the wars and everybody makes profit off it, that's doing the devil's work. God makes certain demands of us, and the kingdom of heaven's not going to come about by us doing all these evil things and not following the basic principles of the. And so here are these people who have this strong, intense vision of the kingdom of God on earth, and they're locked away in mental hospitals, and Serene was given electroshock and told that she was, and put on all kinds of drugs, and by the end of it, she couldn't even remember the experience she has, and she doesn't even believe any of it anymore. Or at least she didn't. I'm hoping that it'll come back to her. But this is what psychiatry does. In a sense, they're doing the work of the Antichrist. And this is what so many religions do, as you said, Russ. How can you call yourself Christian and say, just forget about Jesus' teaching, just read Revelations?
Isn't this electroshock therapy extremely painful?
It's extremely emotionally painful, but they give people anesthetic these days, so I don't think there's any physical pain. It's an emotional trauma to wake up and not know where you are, why you're there. Some people are so desperate they could keep going back for it over and over again. But
wow,
yeah,
it's hard to fathom somebody actually wanting the treatment.
Yeah, it's when you have such faith in the doctor or the psychiatrist that You think they have all the... the doctor is their God. The psychiatrist is their God. I mean, there's the person they trust more than any person on the earth.
That is true. The doctor can't be wrong. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, Seth, I got to tell you, once again, I really enjoy having you here. You're very easy to talk to. You got a whole lot to say.
Thank you.
I get the impression that you and me could probably exchange for long periods of time. I think we've already done it a couple of times.
Yeah.
But do it quite easily, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But for now, I need to get cracking on my end. Tomorrow is my son's birthday, and I need to start his cake before he gets mad at me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But I would love to have you come back to the show again in the future. For you, in your case especially, I'd love to keep an open door policy for you.
Okay.
And you're going to be writing books in the future, so I'm pretty sure you'd love to tell my listeners about them.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually was planning at some point, but I got to publicize this book of doing a Mad Pride anthology.
What kind of anthology?
An anthology of people who were supposedly mad and really had these spiritual visions.
Oh, I would love to talk to you about that when you get that done.
Yeah.
Now, real quick, before we do cut loose for today, are there any last-minute thoughts or anything that, because I know we had a detour and we didn't cover everything, that you would like to cover real quick?
Oh, yeah, I should have had one of these quotes handy for this kind of, here. Okay. This just came up here just because this is an Indian spiritual teacher. You say you're interested in various spiritual teachings. Have you read any of the Hindus at all?
Yes, I have.
So this is not the guy I'm going to quote, but the most famous, I think, probably the modern Hindu was Ramakrishna, Vivekananda. I don't know which ones you've heard of or read.
Actually, I don't remember any particular names, but I haven't written books where you write it down and you memorize it, and you know what I'm saying? I go through some 200, 300 names a year just on the radio show to try to remember names, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, I'll just quote him, Sri Aurobindo, who wrote thousands of pages after he was like Gandhi. He was first involved in the Indian movement for nationalist movement for independence from British colonialism. And then he started having spiritual experiences and retired to an ashram that he set up where people would come and meditate and I guess it wasn't really pray, it was meditating, but they'd worship God. And
isn't that the same one that de Burrell ended up in?
The what?
Isn't that the same ashram that de Burrell ended up in?
Oh, yeah, you know him. Yeah, I know. I forgot, Sasha. Yeah, you really did read that carefully. I know, he ended up in I'm not sure who, it was a different one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But, or, I'm not sure what lineage it was, or Sri Aurobindo's was in Pondicherry, India. They have a little place here in New York and a place in California. But he said, I quote it because he's saying the same thing in more philosophical language than what Serene, the schizophrenic, so-called bipolar, said. He said, the ascent of man into heaven is not the key, but rather his ascent here into the spirit, and the descent also of the spirit into his normal humanity, and the transformation of his earthly nature. This, and not some post-mortem salvation, is the new birth for which humanity waits as the crowning moment of its long, obscure, and painful history. So, yeah.
That's kind of like the long version of what I keep trying to, I keep coming up with all the religious study or the spiritual studies that I do. as I keep thinking that the real goal is not to go to heaven, but to bring heaven to earth.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the short version.
Yeah.
I mean, because the one thing I can't get out of, Seth, is if you bring heaven to earth, who needs to go anymore?
Yeah, well, actually, Sri Aurobindo believed that we could become, if we did that, we would become immortal beings, and death would no longer exist. Of course, this is outside of, I get carted away to the loony bin for saying this kind of thing, but
right.
This was the belief of certainly one of the wisest men on the planet of the 20th century.
Well, I think he's on to something.
Yeah.
At any rate, since like I said a minute ago, it is 3:05, I'm going to go ahead and call this show a wrap. And I've really enjoyed having you here, and I want to thank you for coming back a second time to my show. There were some things I did want to ask that I didn't get to, but maybe I can get to them again in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can come back sometime in the future, and we can talk a little bit more on the church and religion and spirituality, because there were some things that I did want to touch bases with you on that I now know I want to touch bases with.
Maybe you should send me the questions so I know what they are, and I wouldn't spend so much time on other things, and I could get to those, get to the questions.
Yeah, that might be a good idea, because it is easy to get off track. I mean, I've been doing this for 6 years, and one minute you're here, and another minute you're there, and the next thing you know, a whole hour's went by. Yeah. So, at any rate, you have a good weekend, what's left of it, and I'll be in touch with you about another show set up, and maybe if I contact you with a date that I have for Sean Blackwell, maybe I can get you two on the show together.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
So, in the meantime, you have a good one, and I'm going to call it a day.
Okay. Happy birthday to your son.
I will do it. Thanks, Seth.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Folks, I normally go to a little bit of time to tell you all about upcoming shows, and, well, I'm not going to pass that one. I'm going to tell you what's coming up next, but some of the other stuff I'm going to let go. But you may want to check back with me Tuesday night at 8. The book that we're going to be discussing is After the Cross. It's a work of fiction by Michael Lynch and Brandon Barr. And the guest will be Mike Lynch. And I hope to see you folks then. I would go into more detail tonight, right now about some of the other stuff, but as I've said, I'm running behind. I got some things I got to get on to. Real quick, though, I want to thank you for coming. I couldn't have a show without my listeners any more than I could without my guests. And, even if you're only listening, you're participating. I want to thank you for it. Y'all have
or that it was caused by a biochemical imbalance. Which, anyway, there were a number of questions they asked them. And their first answer was rather evasive. But they said, well, just go look it up in such and such a book and such a book. Well, they went back and they looked it up in these books, and the books said, the two were, one was a standard psychiatric textbook, but it repeatedly said there was no proof that there was a brain disorder. And then the other was a report by the Attorney General, which also said there was no proof. Finally, at the end, 5 or 6 months later, the APA itself admitted, quote this, research has shown that serious neurobiological disorders such as schizophrenia, however, exist. Schizophrenia, bipolar, and others have a strong genetic component. They claim that doesn't mean anything really, but that's not the issue. The issue is whether it's a disease and whether it's caused by lesions or disorder in the brain. And they admit here Brain science has not advanced to the point where scientists or clinicians can point to readily discernible pathological lesions or genetic abnormalities that in and themselves serve as reliable or predictor biomarkers of a given mental disorder or mental disorders as a group. Ultimately, no gross anatomical lesions may ever be found. Anyway, at the end of this whole thing, they basically say, well, the check is in the mail, and
we're looking, we just can't find it, basically. But we know it's there. You know what it reminds me of, Seth? Bush's weapons of mass destruction, don't you think?
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
There is something I'd like to take a minute out and do real quick, like, if you don't mind me cutting in here. And that is, I want to remind everybody that your website is www.sethfarber.com. And you can get more information about him and all of his books there, his articles, anything that he's got out there, he's pretty much put on his website. Also, you can get his book at any Barnes, Noble, Amazon, what have you, book carrier. I don't know about some of the smaller chains, maybe not, but the big ones for sure. Also, you can scroll down below the chat room, below the call-in number, and if you look at the bottom of his show description, you'll see a book cover linked to Amazon. If you purchase it through that link, I get a commission, if you'll pardon my shameless plug. But yeah, that would be nice. Also, the call-in number for those of you that want to call in and ask questions is 832-632-7904. And I don't always answer the phone right away because I try not to interrupt my guests. If y'all are listening elsewhere, would like to join the chat room, the address is www.paranormalpalace.com. I'm sorry, Seth, I was waiting till a few people started showing up in the chat room to kind of get that one out to make sure somebody heard me say it.
Yeah. The book is called The Spiritual Gift of Madness. It has a long subtitle, but the title is pretty short and catchy.
Yeah, it is. And, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially given what you're covering here, because in part of your book you do talk about the fact that there are, the mental health system is not correctly treating these illnesses, but you do mention later on that there is a spiritual side to this, in other words. And, there's more to it, the picture, than just that. And I'm going to try to see how much of that we can cover today. But yeah. I did get a question from Jennifer. She wanted to know, what about multiple personality disorder? I think she wants to know, basically, could that be caused by spiritual roots? If I'm wrong, she can ask me. But she just put on here, what about multiple personality disorders? So I don't know what she means by it.
Well, it was that famous case by Sybil where she wrote a book.
Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is Seth Farber. This is his second time on the show, and last time he was fortunate enough to have Diane with him, and this time we don't because of me, to be honest with you. I told him yesterday that I was going to call her, but I misunderstood and thought we understood that I was going to call her at show time, not call her and confirm in advance. So she wasn't there when we called because I didn't call her and confirm it because I misunderstood. So we do still have, Seth with us, and hopefully we'll have some callers and we'll get some more questions in the chat room like we did last time. But we're going to be finishing up where the time we didn't have last time. We run out of time when we're talking about his book, The Spiritual Gift of Madness, The Failure of Psychiatry and the Rise of the Mad Pride Movement, which when I was putting this out and posting it to different networks I'm in, I just basically put on there madness or mystic, you decide, because in the end that's pretty much what this book is asking that question or is making that statement. Would you agree with that, Seth?
Yeah.
So, anyway, I thought that was kind of an eye-catcher, so I thought I'd put that on there.
Yeah.
But, Seth, I want to thank you for returning.
I should say to your audience that I am a psychologist. I don't think you mentioned that. I'm a doctor of psychology.
I am so glad that you mentioned it because I was dropping the ball on that one.
Yeah.
Yes, you are a doctor of psychology. And while you're on that topic, could you help us clarify or help me clarify what the difference is between a psychologist and a psychiatrist?
Well, the psychiatrist goes to medical school, and the psychologist doesn't. It's a PhD program, like any other PhD program. After you finish college, you do a master's and then a PhD. So it's a 3 to 5 year program. And supposedly to learn the intricacies of the human mind, but I think it's really dubious whether I could cite other studies showing that it's not that effective, but nevertheless, I am still I like to consider a doctor. And actually, the question could be raised about psychiatry as well, because they're genuine doctors of medicine, but psychiatry is a form of bogus medicine.
Yeah, I've read that psychiatry is well, I don't know about its beginning, but at least its ending has turned it into something of a pseudoscience.
Well, it began as a kind of keepers. They began making their money in the late 17th century by running the asylums, in which they put everyone from poor people to people that their families did not like. It wasn't that difficult to get someone committed to a mental asylum, as they were called in the 19th century. So there was a big battle in the 19th century. Some of these institutions are custodial warehouses for many of them were crazy people, quote unquote, people who couldn't adjust to the conditions of life as unpleasant as they may have been. Anyway, these places, just like 20th century, they were often tortured in these places. Very few people got better, but that was because of the treatment. There's a book about a multiple personality disorder, and then a number of years later, the psychiatrist, I think, was forced to admit, or she was forced to admit that in fact, that they made it up. She didn't have a multiple personality disorder, in the sense of one personality not knowing where the other personality was going. That was a made-up construct by the psychiatrist. I've never actually, so whether this exists or not, or I'm a hypnotist. I haven't done it in a while, but I was trained in hypnosis afterwards. So you could put a person in a trance where that whether they can have a multiple personality disorder, I've yet to meet anyone, actually, of all the thousands of people. I have yet to meet anyone that has displayed that, so I'm not clear whether you meet people who have different personalities, just like you or I. They seem to be different with different people and in different social contexts. Yeah,
and I think that if such a thing exists, and I could be wrong, it could be equally as possible that there's a other dimensional or a spiritual explanation for it, much like there would be for bipolar or schizophrenia. Like, I've heard it said that we're in a multi-string universe. There are many different dimensions. That what if a person that has this multiple personality disorder is really exchanging places with other people in other realities? Their minds are, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you would think of that, but I thought I would throw it in there as food for thought, in other words.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that theory before. Yeah.
Well, I think I just the first one that came up with it, and I'm kind of like Bill Engvall. I get these unusual ideas. Well, most people would say we're unusual. But getting back to the subject at hand, the actual, book itself, two of the things that you target in your book, out of all the multitudes of disorders, are schizophrenia and bipolar. Are these the only two disorders that you would say are, could be related to spiritual causes?
Yeah, in most cases, most people I've met who have had spiritual experiences were people who were labeled schizophrenic, schizoaffective, or any of the so-called psychosis. In most cases, the person is going through a genuine crisis. But so frequently in these cases, a breakdown is an opportunity for a breakthrough, as Dr. R.D. Laing said in the 1967. And there are a number of places at that time in the 70s. Two most well-known were Soteria House, which I talk about somewhat, and Diabasis, which actually gave asylum to people who were supposedly schizophrenic. This is in the 70s, so I think, they picked, of course, as Thomas Osborne, who just died this weekend, as people don't know, he's the great warrior against psychiatry. He was a psychiatrist. He was 92 when he died. He wrote The Myth of Mental Illness. He also wrote a book on schizophrenia, where he called it, the book is called Schizophrenia, the Sacred Symbol of Psychiatry. And it was considered that when I was in graduate school, the most devastating mental illness of all. And there's immediately what happens when people go off the drugs abruptly is that they have withdrawal effects. Psychiatrists say, filled with all, the psychiatry is told all kinds of lies about the drugs. I mean, one of the common lies is that they correct an imbalance. Well, there's no evidence of a quote unquote imbalance in the first place. So
right.
That's right. So
no, I mean I've studied that, and I happen to know you're correct in that. And the truth of the matter is, it's really listed in your book that these hunger strikers went on strike, and they got a reaction from the APA, and the APA did anything in their reaction, their response, except provide the proof of this chemical imbalance. And there was another group that you said, another panel, that responded back for the hunger strikers that told them how they were not answering adequately and how this went back and forth. But in the end, the APA never proved that there was such an imbalance, in other words.
That's right, exactly, yeah. It's quite a dramatic thing that David Oakes of Mind Freedom International, who was himself quote-unquote labeled schizophrenic when he was at Harvard, a student at Harvard, and was hospitalized 5 times. He was determined to expose the lies of the psychiatric establishment, and the hunger strike turned out to be a pretty successful way to do it, considering it's hard to get publicity. They did get publicity, and
had some good parties involved as well.
Yeah, and as you said, the people on the committee, that were backing them up there were a few PhDs and a lot of MDs, like Peter Bregan, Fred Bauman, who's a neurologist, mostly PhDs. It's hard to find, Lauren Mosher was still alive. That's another story in itself.
If you'll pardon me for a minute for interrupting you on that one, Seth, I want to call your attention back to a name you mentioned, Peter Bregan. This is a key name, in my opinion, if you want me to be honest, because of the fact I've looked the man up, I've done some study into him, and the man is been practicing 44 years. He graduated Harvard. He actually goes to court to help get people off of medication that are being forced to take it against their will. He's also got a lifetime membership in the APA, even though he's going against the APA. I mean, he's known as the voice of consciousness of the psychiatric profession. He is a psychiatrist, he is a member of the APA, but he sees the problem and he's trying to stand up and make transformation. I find him to be a key person because of all his credentials. I mean, the man's pretty much impeccable, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Mhm.
And he was one of the people that you mentioned that were standing up backing David Oak's hunger strike group.
Yeah. Mhm. There were about 10 people, and one of the other people was David Cohen, who's a PhD, but Dr. Cohen, he co-authored a book with Peter Bregan on how to get off of psychiatric drugs. The thing was, I have this in front of me now. At the end of this whole thing, this debate back and forth, the APA finally issued a statement on the doc. First, when they went on the hunger strike, David and I guess there were about 10 other people asked the APA for proof that in fact emotional suffering was caused by a lesion in the brain, and that there are a few better places called moral reform, in which they actually treated people like human beings, and those tended not to be run by psychiatrists, but to be run by priests or clergy people, or just lay doctors. But there was a battle for who would get the government contracts for control of the psychiatric asylums, and the psychiatrists pretty much won it by the end of the battle by the end of the 19th century. So by the 20th century, as Peter Bregan had pointed out, the major change that when they were locking people up, that was the decade in which they began the assault on the brain.
Right.
First, there was insulin shock, insulin coma therapy, which caused convulsions and people to go into a coma. Then, of course, there was electroshock, and now there's been the class of many different kinds of the psychotropic drugs that are used, all of which Peter Bregan, who's the psychiatrist most well known for his critique of psychiatry, is referred to as brain damaging and brain disabling drugs. And that's a contention that Robert Whitaker, the journalist, has corroborated in his book Anatomy of an Epidemic. See if I have the subtitle there.
Yeah, I've been to his website.
Oh, yeah.
Some of these people you mentioned in your book, I was hoping to get on my show later.
Yeah. Anyway, Bob shows that how do you explain the enormous increase? Let me see where I have this book here. The enormous increase in the number of people on psychiatric drugs, enormous increase in the number of people that are labeled mentally ill. Now, if psychiatry was as successful as they often claim to be, you would expect to see a reduction.
Right, exactly.
So what he showed is that, going over all the statistics, is that actually the treatments make people iller. I mean, for example, I was looking, can't find it right now. Oh, here it is. Actually, I should be plugging my own book. I discuss it, Bob's findings in my book too, but it's called Magic Bullet, Psychiatric Drugs and the Astonishing Rise of Mental Illness in America. And he cites a number of studies which shows that the drugs cause a chronicity in people. For the most part, I mean, I don't run into people occasionally who say that the drugs have helped them like nothing else could. But I must say that most people are on those, and this is what the statistics show too. The Harrow experiment is particularly dramatic in terms of so-called bipolars and schizophrenics. And we have lots of other studies on bipolars and schizophrenics. Now, before I say this, I don't want anyone listening to this to go away and throw their drugs down the drain. Not because I don't flush them down the toilet or anything. Not because I don't want people off the drugs, but because